Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're on YouTube and you'd like to actually be part of the conversation, you can travel through the series of links. Click on the link right below this video. That is the link to Zoom. Register there, and then click on the link in Zoom, and you'll get to Mukana. And that's where you can ask questions and you can chat and be part of the community. If you are already in Mukana, this is the time to ask questions. We're pretty low right now, so we're hoping that more people will jump in. Think about the things that you're trying to figure out in virtual production, in media production, and throw them into that question area. If you think you can answer some of those questions, we'd love to have you on the panel. The panel is constantly moving, constantly growing and changing with people like you. And so if you think that you have something to add to the conversation, if you're listening and go, oh, those people don't know what they're talking about, then jump on, show us, be part of the conversation. If you're not sure about your kit, you can get here early. We open up at 6 a.m. in the morning. Mostly we're just talking about whatever we feel like talking about at the moment. But if you come in with a tech question, we will answer it or work with you on mics and cameras and lights and so on and so forth. So 6 to 6:30 is a great time to do that. We do mic checks at 6:40, between 6:40 and 6:45. And if you would, unless you're a guest on the second hour, you need to be here by 6:40 to be in the panel. So do that. The first hour is all general questions. Second hour is something specific that we've decided to talk about. And today we're going to talk about hosting, just some of the tips and tricks on how to think about hosting. And so that should be interesting. Tomorrow, we've got Ray Maxwell. He's going to be talking about color theory, which we're really excited about. And then on Saturday, we've got two things. We've got the folks from South by Southwest Education for the education hour. They're going to be talking about their approach. And we have Andy Carluccio from Zoom OSC. First training on Zoom OSC is going to start 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And we're going to have Grant actually be a guest instructor on Zoom OSC. Sorry, it's a little bit of an inside joke. Anyway, Andy's going to get us set up. There's going to be 5 Saturdays of Zoom OSC, and we'll and it's going to be really, really great. Our goal is to get a bunch of us all up to speed there. Also, a reminder that on Monday will be our first time we do it in the evening. So we're going to actually do at 6 o'clock. We're going to be doing the same thing as office hours, just general Q&A, and it's going to be coming actually right after AV Tech Talks. And I think Ed, you're doing AV Tech Talks, right?
Yep, that's correct. I'm one of the 3 hosts of AV Tech Talks.
Yeah,
we meet every Monday.
What time?
So we're on the East Coast, so that'd be 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern time, right, that we do our sessions.
So the perfect use of your afternoon and evening is to start over at AV Tech Talks, and then you can just simply jump over. We'll start mic checks at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard and 9 o'clock Eastern, and so we'll do the mic checks. The conversation will, at least at the beginning here, will start at 6:30. So we'll still have kind of a little bit of setup time and a little bit of mic checks, and then we'll jump into it at 6:30. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
That's not in lieu of morning. There's going to be a morning session,
not in lieu,
and an evening session, correct?
That's correct. It's more.
Okay.
We're not taking anything away from anybody. It's just more of this, just in case you didn't have enough already. All right. Anyway, let's jump into the questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, the first one this morning comes from Jeffrey Reyes in Bronx, New York. Is there any advantage of using a Streamdeck for switching inputs on an ATEM Mini versus using just the ATEM Mini buttons themselves?
Jason?
Yeah, there's a huge advantage. If you don't have a control panel like I do, off to my right, and even if you do, it's really handy to be able to have kind of a no-look feeling number of buttons to just do straight up easy sets. So yeah, absolutely.
Go to Roscoe.
Same thing. Yeah, it allows you to add many more to one button. You can throw in macros. You could throw something like QLab. You could trigger things in QLab. I mean, all kinds of things you can do with one button that you can't do with just an ATEM Mini interface.
Yeah, I mean, the ATEM Mini, every button does what it does. With the Stream Deck, every button is definable. So you can have it turn lights on and move things around. There's lots of things that you can keep on expanding from. For instance, I'm in the business. I'm in the process right now of building up either a 2ME or 3ME, a 3ME switcher with a bunch of ATEM Minis that'll all be run by Stream Deck. And so I'm tying all the switchers together and building kind of complex relationships between them. It's totally absurd. I'm just doing it as a kind of a thought experiment, but and it'll make a great picture on Twitter. So anyway, we'll that's coming up. Hopefully I'll be able to show it to you next week. I'm pretty close now. All right, next question.
Laura Seal from Greensboro says, assuming you can set input sources to match, is 1080p 30 or 1080p 60 the better choice for the ATEM Mini output for streaming, webcam, and mainly Zoom use? Any reason you'd ever use 2997 or 5994 in online platforms?
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, that a lot of questions. I'll answer maybe the first couple and then I'll hand it off. There's no reason to use 1080 60. You're just working it harder than you need to, especially given the use case that you're talking about. Other than that, as far as a drop frame is concerned, my entire system is set for drop frame, but if I'm going to actually broadcast live, which I still, I've got a few options, but I use the ATEM Mini, the Pro ISO. I still use that to reclock it to 1080 30 because I see no benefit. I don't play games, so yeah, no benefit.
Go ahead, Leland.
The other thing to consider is Zoom is speaking on the forefront of making 25 frames per second the standard for web conferencing video. Whether that's going to go through or not in complete form is questionable at this time, but plan on that being the case. It's the norm across on the overseas end as well already for PAL, so we'll have to see how it goes.
Go ahead, Bill.
And I just want to mention, because everybody, the first time you hear drop frame, if you're not used to it, it is the worst naming of something that's ever been done, because it does not drop frames. It never drops frames. You can't drop frames. It drops frame numbers. And so you do not get less frames when you're working in drop frame time code than when you're working in regular time code.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Actually, you get a slight increase in a velocity of frames because the frames, anyways, 2997. And it's all about, if I was feeding some sort of broadcaster that was expecting to absolutely hit accurate time, then maybe I have to use 2997. There's a reason that you want to use it, because broadcasters use it to keep their hours timed properly. But otherwise, for most purposes, no.
Yeah, I run my whole system on 2997 mostly because if I record stuff and I want to use it later for other things, I want it to be in 2997, not in 30, because a lot of your systems will not work well in 30. So I would recommend keeping the entire system in 2997. It is 30 when it hits YouTube or Facebook or other things. I mean, they convert it to 30. If you give them 2997, they just convert it to 30 on the way through. So like when I set my encoder, I set the encoder at 30 because I'm giving them what they expect. I do try to do as much work on my end so they don't have to do any work on their end, because their end is generalized and kind of mush. So if you're going to send it to a public forum, that's kind of the way I kind of approach that. The 30 to 60 is really games in action versus people talking. So if you're doing 60 frames a second, people talking, that's twice as much bandwidth that you're, more temporal and spatial and everything else for no reason. If you are doing sports, esports, that type of thing, 60 frames and even 120 frames a second is awesome. And I can tell you, 120 frames, awesome. Anyway, Jason and then Mickey.
Yeah, 120 frames is absolutely amazing. I just got a firmware update to my Sony TV, and the PS5 truly does 120 frames a second, and it is staggering. But along those lines, yes, absolutely. If you don't have ISO record, and you have a good reason like I do, and I suppose Alex does, if I didn't have dedicated decks for my inputs, I absolutely would not do that. To that end, 1080 30, but only on your encoders.
Mickey?
And yeah, Laura mentioned in her question that it's specific to mainly Zoom use, and Zoom maxes out at 30 anyway. So if you don't have other deliverables that you have to prepare for, then yeah, just don't go to 60.
And the thing to know is that while Zoom may be looking at 25 a frame, which would be a little bit of a bummer, the YouTube and Facebook are 30, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what you're doing. If you're streaming to them, they are 30 frames a second, and they will conform everything you send them, whether it's 2398 or 25 or whatever. Now they'll do 60 if you turn it on to 60 mode, but in general, when you're pushing in 25 and 2398 are just move to 30, and that means that you're asking a generalized server that doesn't know you to add frames to your video, which is never a good thing. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to Jeffrey Reyes again from the Bronx, who asks, Alex, what video scope software do you use on Windows and what do you use on Mac?
I don't use any scopes on Windows, so I don't know those for video. I use Scopebox as software on the Mac. And then the other one that I'm using right now for some of the work that we're doing is not, I guess it is Windows, is the AJA color analyzer. So we're going to have AJA actually on talking about the color analyzer next week. And I've been using it extensively for the last month, and it is amazing. So it's an amazing little box. Like all of my work went up a level with it. So those are the two that I guess that's a PC. It's a piece of hardware that does it, but it's great. It's for HDR. So anyway, but Scopebox otherwise on as far as Mac software, that's what I'm using. Anybody else use something different? Okay. All right. Next question.
And it's from Guy Cochran here on the panel, our friend from Seattle. What encoders allow for 1080p with Facebook Live specifically?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Isn't that the Clearcaster that you just sold me, guy? I'm pretty sure it was the Wowza Clearcaster, right? That's the one that they tagged as it could do.
That's correct. I was hoping that somebody else would have another answer besides that one. That one's really expensive.
So you can get.
Yeah, it was.
It's possible to get. It's possible to get 1080p. By them clear listing your channel. So you don't need a piece of hardware to do it, but you have to know somebody, or you have to talk to somebody, or you have to have some good reason to have it upgraded to 1080p. So 1080p it's possible to put you on a different pipeline so that you can get 1080p. But the easiest way to do it, kind of like the Facebook portal into it, the easiest way to do it is to get Clearcaster. You're actually on, my understanding is you're actually on an entirely different ingest network when you're on the Clearcaster as opposed to a regular stream. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I feel like I'm throwing the ball up again and catching it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here we go. So there is one other way, and that's vMix. And if you connect your account to vMix, you can push it in 1080p. The other thing is to have a gamer account. I didn't know about the whitelisting of the account, but I wanted to try pushing. I have an AWS instance running of the show of Office Hours right now, and I want to try pushing it into a page and see if how it looks through vMix. And maybe that's a test we can run tomorrow morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
I think Videon, I think they boasted that too. So that might be another, which is the manufacturer, the OEM of the Amazon box, right? So I think they mentioned something about that also. So we might have to dig deep.
By the way, the Videon it's the same hardware, but the software is very different. That what Amazon added to it makes it better than what you buy from Videon itself. Stuart.
If you're pushing an RTMP or RTSP stream, I think you'll find the Uray boxes will also do it. They're the cheap Chinese
they'll
ones.
They'll send it 1080p. The question is whether it'll show up as 1080p. That's
Facebook's end, isn't it?
No, that's what I'm saying. You can send 1080p all day to Facebook. Every encoder can do that. It's whether Facebook will display it as a 1080p is the unknown. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I just double checked with the API. They now you have to choose something in there to say it's a 1080p, but you can definitely build something if you have the ability to do 1080p. You can. I do also want to verify something that you said before on YouTube. YouTube can do 60 frames a second, but nothing more on from the encoding thing. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, 120 is not something I stream to YouTube. It's something we stream to Akamai. So anyway, when you have control of the frames, the thing that I am going to be experimenting with next week, of course, is streaming HDR to YouTube, because YouTube now does it'll now accept HLG and HDR10 or PQ input, and so we're kind of curious about what that's going to look like. But again, to remind everyone, we're going to start Resolve training at the end of February with Mark and Steve at Ripple, and HDR streaming and HDR production and everything else in surround is about to have its day. This year and next year are going to be the big days for that. It's going to be hard to go back. Like I spend all day looking at HDR, and you just look at SDR and you're just like, everything looks like it's broken. And the problem is now that 91 million phones sold by Apple. It's 91 million people that are able to shoot and look at HDR footage. Their eyes will slowly tune and they'll look at everything that you're doing as less than if you don't figure it out. So it's really important as a group for us to figure out how to be the first ones to really understand how to do that effectively. Go ahead, Ed.
For Guy, with the streaming from vMix to Facebook, you actually have to link those, correct? You can't, like, you couldn't put in a restream RTMP and be streaming to multiple places and get that. It has to be one of those direct connections, vMix to linked Facebook account. Is that correct?
I haven't tried the login part when you connect the account to Facebook. If you just push an RTMP, it's going to do 720. But if you connect your account, that's where the API hooks. And that's why the Clearcaster, that's why vMix works, because it actually goes in through your account with the API.
And the reason that the API, they do it with the API is it allows them to, the server on the other end, to define its resolution and output and all the bits and pieces that it wants. So basically the API, instead of just sending a dumb stream to the saying, I think this is what you want, it goes in and checks with the server, and the server says, this is how I want to get it. And the API and the encoder goes, okay, this is what you're going to get. And that's why that was the breakthrough with the Clearcaster was that it was server defined. You know, you have a piece of hardware, you attach it to the account. And I got to see the Clearcaster before it was at Wowza, which was at Colleen Henry's house, which is this a big piece of hardware with a thing hanging out, and she had her she's trying to explain to me what she was doing, and her jaw was wired shut and she's like typing away, building this box, and then she just sent it to Wowza and just said, I need you to build this, Jason.
Yeah, if you end up talking to Facebook or anybody else and think that you have a way to try it, I have a fairly high-end Restream account. I think it's maybe $1,000 a year. I'm happy to give it a shot. Just let me know.
Yep. Next question.
Stephen Bauer wants us to focus on the technical aspects of the first COVID team press conference. He says it was a mess. It was a virtual event, but the audio and video and overall production was horrible. They hadn't seen any office hours, obviously. He hopes they can improve, and the event was great when you could hear. So they obviously had audio issues as well.
Yeah. Yeah, not to get into the politics of it, because I think we just want to make sure we keep that out of it, but we'll look at it technically. Technically the problem is that, so all those backgrounds are digital backgrounds.
Step and repeat.
Step and repeat, which is not good for encoding, and it doesn't look good, and then they're too small in frame. Obviously the audio was bad, which is, there's really not any excuse for a high profile stream to have bad audio. There's an excuse when you're kind of playing around with it. When you have a handful of people, they're gonna be seen by millions of people. No excuse to do that, and then, they have to figure out their framing if they really want to do ASL. I mean, it's a thing that the Biden campaign has kind of doubled down on, but it's serving. I mean, it's just that they have to figure out where they're going to put it in a way that actually makes sense. I know that I can't get into that anyway. So so I think that was the issue. And it's just like when you're trying, I think the fundamental thing that politicians that I've noticed over the last, 6 months is that it's not just a matter of putting out the information. You're trying to sell people on something. And so when you try to sell them on something, you should, it should look like broadcast, it should look like everything else they're doing, because the delta in cost is almost nothing. Like, it's almost nothing in the grand scheme of this. And it is unacceptable for, anybody to put out, the stuff that they're putting out, because they're not going to get the outcome. No one's going to listen to people who look stupid on TV, and that's the problem, is they're not going to make any traction. Like, no one cares about that, because whether they think about it, the key we have to remember with quality is whether people think about it consciously or unconsciously, they're making the decision about your validity and your authority based on the quality of your video and your audio. And the thing is when your video and your audio are better, it is for an American like having an English accent. So anyway, you have more authority. And so anyway, the key is that, what all these politicians should be doing, and everyone who wants to move the world forward in some direction, is investing in their audio and video quality and making sure that it's at its highest level, because that is a one-time cost. It's a small cost compared to these huge campaigns and these huge processes and trying to move people forward. And when people subconsciously think that you're less than, or kind of half put together, you know, they're not listening to you in the same way that they would if you looked great. You know, and the difference between looking great and looking the way that conference went is, you know, tens of thousands of dollars of gear, like $10,000 or $20,000 of gear that spread across those 5 people, and possibly less. And given that it was seen by millions of people, it would have been a worthwhile investment. But you know, it's really they're missing the mark. They're missing opportunities. They have free press and they're blowing it with this horrible start. So anyway, Stuart, and then I don't care about the politics of it. It just anyway, Stuart, and then Grant, and then Bill.
Just on the tech side, when I looked at that after like reading the question and looking for the video, it looked like 3 times dubbed VHS. There was so little information in there, and it had started to lose its brightness. So it's like somebody had put a graphic over the top of it. Yeah. But from looking in from outside, there seems to be a difference in the amount of enthusiasm that people in the US and Canada and what have you have got for making sure they look good on any sort of thing where they're presenting, compared to some of the responses that we're getting here in Melbourne about like from corporate or sporting and whatever. They really don't care about how they look. And this is like government and what have you, and even stuff that's being broadcast on the nightly news. They're just not doing it to this sort of level. And it kind of makes it, you're right in that you say that the viewer has no confidence in the person if the person doesn't look professional.
Politicians and press cannot expect people to take them seriously or believe that they have any semblance of the truth when they look and sound horrible. It just lowers their authority, you know. And so if they want to start regaining some kind of people actually believing them or actually listening to them, they have a lot of things to do that they have to do. But step one is get a good camera and a good mic. Like, stop being so small. Grant, and then Bill.
I was just going to mention again, we've talked about the ASL. That Apple did on their events. I really like it. It's just it's two pips really, and so they take the main program and then they do a nice grey background and then another little pip with the ASL, and they make it as a separate feed that you can very easily watch, and it looks great. And it's not overlaid on top of the.
I think you're absolutely right that the way to serve ASL, which is 0.1% of the American market, because it's 0.2, but people who have lost their hearing after they've learned language would generally prefer captions because it's that, and so you're absolutely right that what there is to do is you put out a second stream that is completely designed for them, that looks great. That we're not trying to do this. It's the haphazard connection of the two of them is what makes it so unbearable. Bill?
So I'm going to push this in squarely the realm of public relations. And it's gotten a bad name over the last 20 years or something because people think it's about spin and stuff like that. It really isn't. Public relations is about clarity of communication to an audience so that everything is understood correctly. Most journalists came out of the print industry, and you would not publish a poorly worded paragraph or something with spelling errors. And they just haven't made this mental change to the fact that video communication is the primary way people get information, and it has to have the same standards that you used to have for print. If you wouldn't split a verb or mangle something because you thought you were professional, how in the world can you not light and mic and put out a reasonable audio signal? It's the same thing.
I've decided that, oh my gosh, you just gave me the greatest idea for a tweet, which is that I'm going to put out a newspaper with I'm going to put stick figures, and I'm going to put like kids' handwriting down the columns and go, when you put bad video up, that's what you're doing.
This is the equivalent of your newspaper for the world. It'll be the record.
That's exactly. Okay. Tomorrow I'll have it up. All right, Jason.
Oh, perfect. Sideways letters and like
just
lines out and through.
We're going
to, it's so true though. Bad grammar. It is the equivalent of bad grammar.
No, it's the equivalent of handwriting, like bad handwriting.
It's the equivalent of handwriting bad grammar. We could just keep going with it.
Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, to that end, I was wondering if you were thinking about ASL, that second pip do you think there's a placement thing where like putting it high up at eye level is a good thing, or
So-
does it not matter at all?
Well,
I just don't know these things.
Let's touch on Ed Willick actually asked. We'll jump to this question because Ed had a question about that, which is framing and PIP and how was a poor example. So let's go ahead and bump that one right now. So I've had a lot of experience in the last fall doing ASL PIPs. So we've thought about this a lot. So here's the thing about ASL PIPs. Number one is you work with specific ASL providers that you can have a lot of interaction with. So you don't randomly grab them, because if you randomly grab them, you get random ASL folks and you get all kinds of weird backgrounds and everything else. Second thing is you actually tell them you want a gray background like this. So and for some people, send them to them. So you send them to them. You want them a minimum of a C920. You don't want them to use a lot of ASL folks will have like their laptop or whatever on a stool in front of them and everything else. Get them a tripod and everything else. If you're going to do a lot of ASL, what you do is you invest in you find the 5 or 6 ASL folks that represent what you're going to do, and you send them the gear that they need, and then give them some lights and give them everything. You want them to look great. If you're going to do ASL, if you're going to take care of that community, take care of them, treat them like another piece of the broadcast. Don't have it be, and then we did this thing, with bad lighting and everything else. Make it look great, and so have 2 lights, have a C920, have a gray background. They don't need mics, so that, they're just doing their thing. Now you need to frame them so that you can see down to their elbows. Otherwise you're not going to get it. Now, what I personally like a darker gray. If I'm asking them what they're going to wear, I don't want them to wear black because it looks a little rough, but darker gray looks nice and then what they do is if they keep their extended, their sleeves don't go past their elbow or just past their elbow, you can really clearly see the hands and see them doing what they're doing as you do it. So as far as that setup, it looks really nice. Then, where you put them, you can put them in the middle, and traditionally, we put them in kind of, if you're looking at the screen, it's to the right and kind of middle framed. Now, what's nice is if you do it that way, you have a bunch of branding opportunities there. So you can put your logo, up next to it. You can down below, you can put, other, anything else that you want to, call to actions and so on and so forth. You don't need to leave it empty. If you're going to take up that space, you might as well put it in there. I like to put just a little edge around both of them to kind of frame them a little bit. And then, just a real subtle edge around it. And so, but that's kind of the setup for it. But again, I strongly agree with Grant that the best place for ASL is in its own stream, where you can make it look great. You can make it as big as you want it. You can make the ASL folks look as good as they can be. You're going to frame it all up and design it. So I do think that you need to serve that community. And I think that you need to serve it with, the best super source that you could put together that looks amazing, that is the best stream they've ever seen as an ASL user, but give it to them as their own separate stream, and then have the program stream be the program stream. And you can put a little lower third down that says ASL available, blah, 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 blah. Like you can keep on telling people that it's there, but don't mash it into the main feed, because then the ASL, it looks kind of mashed in, and the broadcast everything just doesn't, it's trying to serve 2 different solutions at the same time badly. Ed and then Jason.
So I agree. I think the doing the 2 separate streams, but then how do you frame the ASL stream so that they still see what's happening in program?
Well, you put we just put the whole program, into a window, into a super source. So we don't put it over top. So you put the program, you make the program smaller, and you pop it in, you do a pop in, and then you put the ASL next to it. So they still see the whole program, and they see the ASL. And then you can, and you can add, because you have that extra information, you'll have extra real estate at the top and bottom. You can add other things that are, you could even add burned in lower thirds if you want into that, burned in captions if you wanted to, just to make sure that they're there. They could have the ASL and the captions, and, you can do a lot of other things there. And once you start burning in captions, you can start making them look better. So you can design how they're going to look, because you have the capacity to check the fonts and build the stuff up. And then you take the same captions, you make them closed caption for the main one. So even if you're watching the main one, you could turn on, you could open up the closed captions, but then you take the ones that are there, and then they get all that information. In fact, you could probably get, because you have extra real estate. We haven't done it. We've just done mostly we've done is had a lower banner across the bottom, and use those spaces as a branding opportunity and a call to action opportunity. And then and then you have that window, but you make it nice and big if it's just going to be dedicated to them. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Jason.
One thing to understand is that it just like with Alex, when he sees other stuff in the background, he gets distracted. So anybody that's trying to focus on ASL, if somebody else becomes very move around, they might get distracted by what's going on, and they can't see what they can't focus on the ASL, therefore they can't read it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
This caught my eye in the chat room, and I can't help but ask because I've never had to shoot ASL. Is there any benefit to shooting and maybe broadcasting at a higher frame rate?
Not really. Yeah, we haven't had. I mean, maybe, but the problem is we've been bringing the ASL in over Zoom, so we're at 30 frames a second anyway. This is done in post, so that's one thing. But for what we're doing, most of our stuff is all we bring the ASL. It's been a boom for the ASL folks that have gotten good at it because they used to be only people that showed up at events at locations. Now they can be anywhere in the world and they can show up and remotely when they do it well. Now I will say that Apple, like the lighting and everything else, I mean, they crushed it. Like they were like, and they did it the way Apple does things, and that's, people should use that as a that's a great frame there. It's a little wider than I normally go on it, but it definitely works, but not much. And then but really well lit, great background. I like the little bit of vignetting, and Apple went simpler. I mean, I oftentimes will use some of the rest of that space, but I think that, Apple, of course, is the, and you can also, by the way, you don't need to do 16. Usually we don't do 16:9 for ASL. They don't put their arms out that far. So the 16:9 is great, but you can really do that in a 1:1 ratio is fine. Like they'll never go out of the frame. Anyway, next question.
Manolo Lozano is here. No location for Leland. How do you add the timings as part of your feed? How much control have you got over them?
This is basically an input from vMix, and I can take you over to the screen real quick to show you if somebody wants to put that up and pin it up on the screen. Basically, it's a built-in clock. The only way you can get to that is by going to the settings feature within vMix. When you do, you're going to go to the options setting and make sure you turn on the production clocks. By turning on the production clocks, that opens it up in the center. When you go to the center and double click this item, you'll be able to set it up for one of two different clock formats. You can actually have two different production clocks going. This allows, in this case, for an event in precision of fractions, starting at a given time, ending at another. And then I can create an input from that particular source, which drops down into the frame of the panels down here that I can simply go and grab the clock and make that a layer on the screen that you're watching right now. So it's basically something I can turn on and off at any time. Yeah. And I can change the timing. If I wanted to go in and actually change this to something of a recording time or a streaming time or just a standard clock, I can also change the colors on that input to any type of branding. If I wanted to double click that item and go back and change these color formats to red and black or anything of any other stretch that I want to pull across, I can even wipe out the timer and just leave the clock. There's a lot of different ways you can manipulate it. Go ahead, Jason.
Super easy way to do that. If you don't want to play with really complex software and you happen to have an ATEM Mini, there are plenty of iPhone and iPad apps that, will jam sync to any NTP server, and you can just put that in as a PIP, and that's flawless as far as I'm concerned, unless you're unless you're trying to genlock with it, and I don't even know how you do that.
Next question.
Moving on to Gabriel Ung, our friend from Malaysia. Good morning. Could the panel share their thoughts on the M1 Mac Minis after putting it through the paces in actual production? How are they used in your pipeline? Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
I used one just yesterday for a remote. In fact, I sent one out and had one here, and then just for monitoring, I was using the streaming bridge. And let me put it this way: I've yet to find something that it really can't do as far as live, as well as I'd say any MacBook that's under $4,000.
Go ahead, Stuart, and then Grant.
I didn't buy it, but my dear friend Brett Ramsey of In Pit Lane here in Melbourne has a brand new M1, the base spec one with the least amount of memory, if I remember rightly. And we've been running multiple stream events and what have you, and he was telling us the other day that after editing sections for like stories for YouTube pieces and what have you, he reached over and put his hand on the Mac Mini to see if it was warm, and it wasn't even room temperature. It was cold.
Yeah.
So it's not working that hard to do all that editing work. So that means it's going to be more reliable, and they're not even pushing the performance yet.
Grant and then Guy.
Yeah, so I'm using an M1 Mac Mini now, just the entry-level one, as my Zoom machine. It's running a 4K monitor, and it's silent and rock solid. My biggest gripe is the maximum of 2 display outputs.
Yep.
It seems to be a limitation, whether you're on the laptop or the Mac Mini. It will only do 2 out, and that's a real challenge for us. If we're doing Zoom rooms, we really love having 3, and so yeah, we're working around that and actually looking at buying some Intel Mac Minis. I need to get 6 in the next little while, and we're really on the fence, but we think we're probably going to have to go Intel for that reason alone.
Good, Guy, and then Michael. Pretty quick. We're running behind it on questions.
Yeah, a lot of people probably think this is sacrilege, but I'm running my AWS instances via Teradici, so I'm running vMix on my Mac Mini M1 up in the cloud, and so I've got it as a dual display right now with Teradici, and it's really cool and super snappy. So I'm using it as a test machine. I'm just beating on it with lots of stuff, and this is one where it is so snappy. It blows my mind that this is even a thing. And thanks, Jef, for kind of leading the way with all this, because you've inspired me. So thank you.
That's great. Michael, and then Victor.
Yes, I'm on the M1 Mac Mini as well, and it works great. I've got the 16 gigabytes of RAM, and I've got 2 34-inch curved LG monitors, which I just got, and they work great as well.
That's great. Victor?
Yeah, Grant, I'm sure you're aware, but there are workarounds to the limit of 2 monitors that definitely do work.
Yeah, the DisplayLink adapters work great, and that does work. I just don't know if I want to put that in 6 racks and have that little dongle and some software running. It just feels
understood.
This is, I think, one of the 12 that we have. So, I'm standardizing on them for a bunch of things that I'm working on. So my own home kit, I'm going to be stacking up Mac Minis to run a bunch of the bits and pieces. I'm getting my kids 2 Mac, the little Mac Pro, the small MacBook Pros, for their school stuff with M1s. But I'm not going to buy any more Intel's machines. The speed is so fast. I don't think that, and I have been able to max it out with an 8 gig Mac Mini with Resolve running 6K RAW files on BRAW. It slows down to 17 frames a second playback. But I mean, you're talking about a $700 machine, but that's the place where I kind of pushed it. I was like, okay, I'll let you go. All right. Next question.
KDB from Parts Unknown. Any experience with Slido for chat, polling, and during a virtual event with Zoom? Anyone integrated that into Keynote or PowerPoint? Success or failure? What's your favorite polling and chat software? Is an add-on question here.
I don't have any I don't have any experience with Slido because we have Mukana. So and that's I opened up Slido and I immediately found a whole bunch of things that Mukana does that Slido doesn't. So then I just put it down. I was like, well, I'm not, there's nothing.
I just want to make sure I'm not mistaking. She actually wrote Slido. I'm assuming
she means Slido.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure too, but I wanted to, just in case I was wrong.
I don't think there is a Slido. Slido is bought by or maybe is it Slido? Is there I thought it was Slido.
I think it's Slido.
Oh, is it Slido? I think it just got bought by Cisco to make sure we're on the same.
Yep.
So to me, Cisco is a place where technology goes to be incorporated into the board. It'll be a solid solution as part of Cisco's delivery to large corporations, but it ceases as soon as Cisco buys a piece of software. I cease to look at it as a real option, for what I do. Leland except for Meraki, so Leland and Grant.
There was another cool little feature I discovered over on Google Slides that's available under the present feature that I was using for closed captioning. There's also a Q&A feature on there that goes through the internet. that allows you to go and send people to a web page. So if you start this, you can basically send people to that link over at slides.app.google, and then the questions will appear in this little box. You can follow the timer as to when things are coming in, and then just present them on the screen as you go if you were to use that screen share. So it's just another option.
Grant?
I can't get Slido to load. I don't know if it's down at the moment, but I have used it quite a lot, and really like it as just a very simple questions, voting up and down. It's very easy to get moderators in if you have event staff from the end client that want to have people moderating. It's very easy to turn on and off. The interface is really nice. Yeah, I just got a 504 error from Slido.com, so it's not a great advertisement. I haven't had that before. And actually, a nice little tip on that too is that they have very nice education rates, and so you can get like the high end plan. And so one of the directors of my company, my 10-year-old son, was able to use the school account and get education rates on that.
That's great. Next question.
Moving on to Victor Cajallo, our friend here in the panel from Brookings, South Dakota. Can the panel discuss the new Sony Xperia PRO and how they feel it would benefit their professional workflow?
We talked about this a lot yesterday. We're really excited about it. I think that it's probably the first, except for the hydrogen that I got, which I still enjoy using. This is the first Android phone in a long time that I've been excited about, and I think that it provides a lot of opportunity for backhauls, from cameras, live streaming from cameras, and possibly, being a camera view for Instagram and other things like that. We don't know yet how far it'll go, but HDMI in, HDMI out, it truly is the first Pro phone. Apple likes to talk about things that are Pro, but they're just kind of better consumer phones. This is truly a Pro phone. So I think that, I love my, I have a bunch of, iPhone Pros, whatever they call it, but this is truly a Pro phone with HDMI in, HDMI out. There's a bunch of things that I do often that I can't do with the, so I'm thinking of getting it anyway. I'm thinking of getting it and adding some software to it that'll make it useful. So I'm pretty excited about what it provides. Go ahead, Chris.
Do you think we'll see a Pro phone with SDI instead of HDMI?
No. That would be funny, though. It would be really funny. All right, next question.
Comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle, who specifies he wants an answer from our 1F Jef, that's Jef Keithley here in the panel, to have multiple remote desktop AWS sessions open on your local machine. What solution do you recommend? TeamViewer, Teradici, Parsec, RDP, Nice, something else?
So I guess I need to answer that.
Yes.
Teradici, if you're point to point, TeamViewer is still my go-to for a lot of control. Just because I could, like whenever we're trying to run, 100 Zoom rooms, TeamViewer is definitely a method to get many on a screen. So I might have 9, 10 on a screen before the computer starts filling out. And it's just something with TeamViewer that it can't support much more than that. But one of the things about Teradici you have to be aware is if you have it full screen, you're getting the resolution. But whenever you window it down, it reports back to the remote computer, says, I want to go at that resolution. So if you've got a 1920 by 1080 and then you squeeze it down as a window, it'll come up with some crazy resolution, and it actually makes the remote machine go to that resolution, which could be very disheartening for some software. Very. Let's just put it that way. Right. And then I have used Nice, and it was decent. It was nice. But the other is Parsec. We've used Parsec. It's just not my go-to. You can do multiple Parsecs, Windows and such, but TeamViewer still is better than AnyDesk or any of the others that I've been able to find.
Leland, 15 seconds.
I was just going to ask Jef about AnyDesk, and he just confirmed my answer, so I'm good.
Next question.
Maggie Barton Baird from Edmonton, Canada. Any tips on auditory translation in virtual events? We have a client looking for English-French translation, and I haven't done auditory before. I have done captioning in a virtual setting. Any success stories, vendors, or things to keep in mind?
French is the hardest. It's mostly because you have to decide what French you're doing. So if you're doing it for Canadian French, it's a little easier. If you're doing it for France French, they are extremely touchy about accents. Just so you know, like if you're doing it in Canada, and I see that you're in Edmonton, so you may be doing it for a Canadian, you can have French speakers speaking into Canadian. You cannot have Canadian French speakers speaking into France. And so the French will pick at everything more than any other country that we've ever seen. We just finished a multi-language. The thing to remember is that as you start to tie these together, is that you want to make sure that you get a translation. If you're doing it live, you just have to the client has to understand that the translation will not be perfect. Like it's not going to be, they're doing the best they can in real time. If you do it in post, you want to get the translation before they do the voiceover. Get the translation, have them look at it and correct it. Have somebody that's a French speaker in your team look at it, especially if you're doing technical, then have them do the voiceover. You want to lock picture on a post one before you start doing because you don't know if you don't know the language, it's really hard for you to fix it in real time. And it becomes very difficult for the editor to manage. When you're doing real time, you have to decide how you're going to do it. Are you going to set a separate track so you can set a separate track that's just pure language? But if you've got, a good audio engineer, like we have here in the panel, you want to do a kind of a soft duck where you can hear the beginning of the person talking and then ducking down and kind of pushing it down, and you can hear it over top, and that way you can hear all the music and all the other bits and pieces and mixing it in. The next step up is to do, the higher end versions of it, for post. You're going to be talking about whether you want to pay for lip sync, which is usually twice as much as the regular bit. So, so those are some of the things to kind of, consider as you work through it. But it's really useful and it's really powerful. I like it much better than subtitling, because especially if you're showing people visual things, if it's in their language, they can look at the visual thing like your slides or whatever you're doing. Whereas if it's subtitles, they're just looking at the bottom of the screen the whole time. Victor?
There's one thing to really keep in mind is that if you just use literal translation, you're not always going to get the colloquialism, sorry, that's a bad word for me, of what the language actually is. I've done translation where I look at the translation and it's correct, but it's not how any natural Spanish speaker would ever say that phrase. So you have to take that into account.
Absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to Gabriel Ung of Malaysia. Based on the ideas from office hours, I've used Zoom Room's separate displays to record ISOs of remote participants and their presentations. Is it possible to turn off Zoom overlays? On the bottom right, it shows the number of participants in mute. It's quite large and hard to mask or crop out.
If it's in your second window, you should be able to get it to where it's only, when you set it to full screen, it should only show the connection icon, I think. Like you can turn everything else off where you see that little connection icon. And what we usually do is we run it through something where we can scale it up 105%, gets rid of all the text. Go ahead, Chris.
The mute icon is special, though, in a Zoom room. What you basically have to do is not mute your microphone. And the way I personally deal with that is I plug a sound device into that particular computer and just pump nothing through it. But that is a special one. And then there's another one on the Zoom room in the lower right-hand corner that tells you how many people are in the meeting. Like, I don't really even care about that either. But I don't know how to turn off the name, Alex. How do you do that?
You can say turn off showing name all the time in your preferences. That's definitely and the Zoom rooms do a better job in that second window. In the remote window, the Zoom room will be almost perfectly clean, as opposed to the if you just use a regular room, a regular meeting.
Understood.
You'll get more text, but Zoom room will take that out. Grant and then Jeffrey, real quick.
I can't figure that out.
Yeah, the talking, like when you have someone who hasn't got their video on, then talking comes up, and so that's a real trick. And really, the only way around it, I found, is get them to turn their video on.
The other problem is if you're in a room and they turn the video on, you get your return feed shows back up in that room. So we have a thing. We tell them probably 10 times, never ever turn your video off, ever. ever. And we and in their prep, in the green room, in the show, right before the show goes, almost before the show goes, right before the show goes, never turn your video off. We don't care what you're doing. Don't turn your video off. You'll ruin the event. Like we just tell them, you'll ruin the event.
So
make it as dark.
You're doing a point to point, but when you're doing a recording and there are
I don't know how to do that.
Well, when there's other people involved, if those people talk, that pops up in the upper right hand corner. There a way around that, if you don't need all three outputs, Grant, is you turn the third output into speaker mode, and then once it only puts that prompt up if you can't see the person who's talking. So if one of your three outputs is in speaker mode, all the guess who's talking prompts go away.
Right, next question. We have to keep moving.
Sorry.
Moving on to Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois. What's the panel's thought on Streamyard, excuse me. I've seen several of my partners use it, and it seems to work well without a large hardware kit for participants.
Go ahead, Sky. We're going to keep it just Sky. We're just keep moving. We're kind of in speed mode now.
Yes, I've used it several times. The level that I'm paying for is reasonable. It's got a lot of interface that these people are showing on their switching hardware and software solutions. There's a lot of built-in graphics available. It does have the 10 people is all you can bring in. So if you're going to have more people than that, you would have a different solution.
Next question.
Talak Lopez Waterman in from Florida. I've purchased and installed audio hijack and loopback. Thank you, office hours. I really love the potential here. Is a virtual audio cables edition the best way to get the signal back into Zoom? What am I missing? Thank you as always.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, if he's asking about how to get the processed audio chain back into Zoom, then yes, a new virtual device and loopback is what I would use to route it back in.
Next question.
Andrew Meyer of Oakville, Ontario, Canada. Alex, you mentioned when drawing on your iPad, you can see the image from the ATEM. What app are you using for that visual feedback?
When I'm drawing on the iPad, I'm drawing over top of a Keynote. It's just built into when you're doing Keynote on an iPad. You can draw on it and it'll show up on Keynote. When I'm drawing just over a whiteboard, and when I want to draw just whiteboards and all I have is an iPad, I set up 40 slides of white and I just keep on spinning to a new page so that I can just sit there and draw as a whiteboard and just show it. PowerPoint is actually better in this case because it saves your drawings, and Keynote will not. That's another aside. It's one of the few places PowerPoint has outdone Keynote. When I do the overlay that I talk about, that's an app that I created that doesn't have any interface. So that's what that is. It's not an iPad app. It's designed to work with my Wacom tablet. Next question.
Talak Lopez Waterman is back from Florida with, has anyone in the panel used the Blackmagic Stream Bridge in a production setting? Any gotchas?
Go ahead, Jason. We'll move on.
The only gotcha that I can think of is that you need to open, I want to say it was port 1935 on your outside firewall. So I'd say a firewall of any kind is a big gotcha.
1935 and 80 are the typical ones that you need for RTMP. So if you can stream to YouTube, you can probably make it work. Next question.
Vincent Alvarez of Bellingham, Washington. I heard Google Voice is, quote, going away in early 2021. I use it to forward work calls to my cell while in the field. Is there a different service that anyone uses?
Go ahead, Jason.
No, they're shifting form. And as far as I can tell, as long as you already had a personal Google Voice account, I don't think they're going to take it from you.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Yeah, all they're doing is they're disconnecting it from Hangouts. So you won't be able to do a phone from Hangouts. That's pretty much it.
Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego asks, is there a way that that an iPhone will work like the new Sony Xperia phone?
No, not that I'm bitter. Next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri. I have a cheap aukey webcam. Looks good, but the field of view is really wide and makes me look like I'm sitting far away with a lot of background. Is there any software I could get to push the view closer so I don't have as much background as it gives me for use in Discord video streams? Note if it helps, he's on Windows 10.
We've had a hard time finding a solid Windows application that does that. On the Mac, there's webcam settings and manual camera. In Logitech on the PC has one that'll run their own Logitech cameras, but I don't think it'll do a standard UBC control over webcams. And so unless someone has found one. Mickey?
Yeah, on the cheap but not too good a quality end, you could run OBS and just,
Right.
Scale it up.
Yep. Go ahead, Stuart. 10 seconds.
Mechanical solution, crack it open and replace the M12 lens with one with a narrower view angle.
All right, next question.
Next
Cheap
question is
webcam, it doesn't matter.
Good.
Gert Mihai, I believe, of Ode Hoverly, that's in Belgium. Has anyone experienced with OBS Ninja? Works great for me by using a smartphone as a top view camera.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
It's not bad. It's a decent way to get in feeds. You can bring it in, get an NDI feed off of it fairly easy. Also, it's not bad for what they use.
There you go. Next question.
Michael Paley from the New York metro area, and a 24/7 audio channel running through a Behringer XAIR mixer. Some of the programs vary in level by 15 decibels. Any benefit to using 2 stages of compressor instead of more compression in one step? Are there any other suggestions to reach a consistent level?
Mickey.
15 dB, that's massive. I would not try to fix that with just compression. If it's pre-recorded material, set a standard for your deliverables for the pre-recorded material so things come in at a similar loudness level. If you have no control of that, faders
Is that
nice.
where you might pass everything through some kind of normalization process? Like if whatever people send you in, you're just going to push it all, normalize all of it.
If you have time to process it before putting it into the playout system, then yeah, a normalization process would help with it.
And some of the playout systems have auto gain. You know, like where you just put it in and it'll look at the entire file and go bunk. And I don't remember, I'll look at which ones we've used in the past where it'll just auto gain all the files you dropped into the playlist to pull them all. You know, it's just peaks. All it's looking for is peaks at 0, you know, or peaks at whatever you define. And it'll just run them all the way across. And it doesn't do any compression. It's just literally just scaling up the.
Yeah, a lot of networks do that for their playout systems, especially for advertising where it's. Yeah, it's
yeah. Next question.
Who needs dynamic range? Moving on, we're at Rick Coombs of Columbia, Tennessee. Is there a way of using Wirecast to use picture-in-picture? Listening to the conversation about ASL, this would be a way for our church to have this option on our live stream.
No, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Absolutely. There's 2 ways to do it. One, you can set a scene with the ASL on one side and then the main picture on the other side. The other one is using the master layers, so that the ASL can be brought in and out at certain points. And there's other ways to do it too.
That's great. Next question.
Rick Bakos of South Bend, Indiana. Do you know of a free or cheap program to do anonymous voting online?
No, I don't know.
Could you just set up a VPN and just
put
it's just
hard. I mean, the hard part is that anonymous voting, the problem with anonymous voting is it's really hard to control how many times someone can vote. If it's truly anonymous, you just have a hard time controlling it. It can be gamed really fast. That's why a lot of people don't do it. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. All right, next question.
JJ McKenna of Santa Vinicio Lower Scobo. Is there a non-cloud host software app for audio collaboration to allow real-time choral or duet singing? The solution begs an internet connection versus point-to-point or ISDN.
So Jeff Francis would be the best one if he was here. But the problem really is that any kind of packetization of the audio creates enough delay that you can't collaborate. This is the craziest thing, is you really need analog. You really need, if you're going to spread it out, it needs to be like that fast. You guys are talking about things starting to fall apart at 5 or 6 milliseconds. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, sorry, no cigar. We're all wishing that could happen, but so far you can't beat physics.
Yeah.
This is the holy grail of the Zoom era.
Physics.
All right, next question.
Moving on, James in Dublin, Ireland says, is the entry-level Mac Mini powerful enough to run Resolve Fusion? The software spec says it needs 32 gigabytes.
I haven't tried Fusion. I have one with 8 gigs, and I haven't tried Fusion on it. So my guess is that if you're doing simple things in Fusion, it's probably enough. If you're doing really, really complex things, it may run out of memory. There's definitely things that in Fusion, my experience of Fusion is what I know of it from Shake or from Nuke. And so I just know that there'll be some operations that'll require a lot of RAM. And that's probably why they give you a minimum requirement of 32. And so I haven't used Fusion at all, and I'm planning to. That's going to be another one of our little tutorial things, but I haven't dumped into it. But nodal compositing is fun. All right, next question.
James in Dublin, Ireland says a lot of talk about instances in AWS and so forth. Could there be an in-depth hour about it?
Yeah, we're talking to the folks at AWS. We're gonna within the next Friday or two, we'll have the team from AWS coming on and talking about it. I'm going to show how I use the links, or how I use them within the company. Mark is actually much more adept at the links at this point than I am. But I'll show how my simple versions of that are used. All right, next question.
From Brett Dykus in Kansas City. Hopefully it's not too deep for the amount of time we have. Could Jef K give us an update on Sienna adoption a year into the pandemic? What are some notable large projects that have used Sienna that will likely disrupt broadcast norms post-pandemic?
Real quick.
Drone Racing League. Right now, the Drone Racing League for the NBC, they were on NBCSN, and that was live to air. We completed that deployment. Everything, the whole broadcast, all done with virtual machines in the cloud and Sienna engines right in the middle of it.
Give us a 10
It's also
second.
a lot of fun to watch.
Give us 10 seconds of what Sienna is.
Well, Sienna is a developer for NDI solutions and other TV solutions, but especially they have the Sienna processing engine, and that's kind of what they're probably referring to. And that's what we built around the processing engine, which I've done a small demo of it with you guys before, I guess. It is the glue, it's the rack, it's the part that is in the middle of it all that allows you to point this to there and do this to that. Audio remapping, video remapping. It's just a very, very powerful suite.
That's great.
But it is out there and being used without a doubt.
I think the one thing I will say is that I'll keep saying is that we're moving into a way that we do production. We're never going back. Like we're never, this isn't going to go back to the way it was. And so for us as a group to embrace that and to get good at it while other people are dragging their feet is what we would call a market opportunity. All right, next question.
Final one for first hour subject. Stuart Fairweather from Melbourne and here in the panel. Guy, what's the expected timeline for the knockoff brand versions of the new Sony phone?
I don't think. Yeah, go.
I think Guy left. Yeah.
I think Guy left us.
Guy had other things to do.
I'll say that I bet you it's really hard to go there. Like it's going to be hard to build a knockoff version of what Sony's doing. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It's also good to note that Android is allowed that, and there are Epiphan and YOLO Box. They both run on the Android operating system. They both use something similar to it, but not what Sony.
Yeah, I think that
Sony might be doing. Yeah.
Sony's in and out, and their monitor, the phone and the 5G and all the bits and pieces. There's nobody else. I don't think anybody else is going to do that anytime soon. I think that's probably the phone to do that on. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm thinking like why? I mean, at least on the more professional level, prosumer level, why put it into a phone form factor when you could just throw 5G radios onto a box that's not necessarily
a 5G radio that you can the thing is that especially if you're able to interact with the social networks, if you're able to use it as a phone, then plumb it onto that, have the video in and out, so it's got its own cameras, it's got its own that can go out as well as in. Being able to then provide that 5G and have a monitor for it. I mean, all of those things would cost about the same. You might as well give it a cellular signal and let it, if it's got, once you have 5G and a monitor and HDMI in and out and its own camera, you might as well make it a phone. Like you have all the pieces to make it a phone. Might as well just make it a phone. And, so I think that's part of it, is you're right. But by the time you put all those pieces together into one little box, you're going to spend the same amount of money, and you might as well just call it a phone because, I don't know. I'm not going to ever buy it and use it as a phone. I'm going to use it as a monitor that streams. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Bill, and then we'll move on to the second hour.
My thinking would be like just make it look like a small HD, like a monitor that has the capability.
But it is a small HD
Stop
monitor.
calling it a phone. Don't put the headset like a earpiece there and all that.
You wouldn't be on Tech Meme if you called it a small HD, a monitor. Like literally you don't get the PR if you call it a monitor. If you call it a phone, they're going to be like the big phone, the pro phone. So from a marketing perspective, it actually makes sense. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just think also, we used to have to shoot particularly news and ENG with big cameras. Now we were able to do it with handy cams, and now they're able to do it with phones. And that whole idea of vlogging, I guess, I'm not very much involved in that, but it's just the natural evolution from bespoke pieces of gear down to a general purpose device that everyone would aspire to have in their pockets that does everything well.
I mean, if you're a creator, that's the phone right now. Like that'll be the phone. And right now the phone is the iPhone. Like everybody's using an iPhone. Like when we work with folks, they're all on iPhones. Not everyone, but like 99% of the creators we work with are on iPhones. And so but this one would be the one that I think a lot of them would dig into because of the extra bits. Anyway, we're going to move on. Speaking of creation and speaking of hosting, we went a little heavy, but we're going to trying to keep it to as much as 5 minutes. And it is amazing how much information we dole out in the 2-minute drill. When we just start throwing the ball really fast. There would be too much to do all hour, but it's quite a thing when we get into that mode. Anyway, so what I thought that it'd be useful. We've talked a lot about shows and creation, and I thought it'd be useful to talk about hosting and, kind of what it takes to host, because I think it's a lot of people will think, well, I'm just going to do a show and start talking to people. And it's the process of hosting is just a lot more complicated than that, and I think that I thought it would be useful to have a conversation about what that process is and what you have to think about. Now we'll talk a little bit. I know there's some questions here about some of the logistics and of shows and show design, and we can talk to that as well. What I wanted to kind of like people, ask me what it takes. I've hosted a lot of shows with all of you, but also before that over the last 30 years. And, I'm always trying to figure out a way to pull it down into something that I can just say really quickly so that I can. And so the way that I kind of describe hosting in general is that a host job is to, and you'll see me do it here, is to cut people off when they're talking too much. It is to pull it out of them when they're not talking enough. And to keep us on, keep the thread of the conversation moving forward. And I think that a lot of hosts have a hard time with that. Like I get all these tweets about people like Leo cutting me off, like on Mac break. And I'm like, that's his job. Like my job is to talk until he cuts me off. Like my job is to be, when you throw me the ball, I'm going to run down the field, and then you're going to, okay, put the ball down. Go, okay, I'll put the ball down. And so as a guest, your job is to do that. The thing that is challenging is to do that. And then also, another really important piece of being a host is being present. You'll notice that I don't check my, people who've tried to back channel me during a show will realize that I don't look at text. I don't look at email. I don't look at Discord. I don't look at anything. I look at all of you. It is because what I'm doing is I'm reading the room. I'm looking at the comments. I'm staying in that conversation. Hosts really undermine themselves when they're trying to do anything other than being a host. And so one of the things that makes it easier is having Bill managing the questions and having Mickey, do the edit and managing the audio there, or whoever else is doing that, and having different people, managing all the different pieces around you. And that's how you empower a host, is to make sure that the only thing they have to worry about is the conversation. And that conversation is something that is that's what you're, as a job, as a host, it's your job to have the conversation, and the thing that is hard is that you do have to get to a point where you're just present and you're responding and being curious. If you're with somebody else, you're just curious about what they have to say about that. And if you look at Leo is really good at just being curious. Like he's just talking, about it. And he's like, oh, I'm curious about it. And you're the next question will pop into your head as a host. That's generally the right question after you've done it a lot. And the key is to ask that question. A lot of times you won't, and sometimes you won't ask the wrong question. But a lot of times those questions start popping in your head when you're really present and when you're really into it. The challenge is to be in the conversation and not be dealing with too much logistics. And so part of being a host is having a team or having infrastructure around you to allow you to do that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, that last part is supremely important. You can't think of yourself as like the person who's in charge and needs to maintain a chokehold, although you are. The purpose really is to be more of a ringleader, to be more of a make people, remind people that they have things to say and that they are indeed interesting and entertaining. Right. And Leo is a great example, but yes, it just takes practice. It is a function of practice, and it is a function of, being ruthless and getting better.
And you are, in this sense, you are the quarterback. Your job is not to run down the field or receive it or block it. Your job is to throw the ball to the next person and keep on throwing that ball as fast as you can, to other people. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, as Jason just said, the ball in this case, I believe, is interesting or entertaining, in whichever order you want to put those in. And also the reflection of this, without a guest, there's no reason for you to be a host. And so at what point is the priority the guest? Is my question.
Again, I guess what I would say is that your job as a host, as best you can, when you have good guests, is all about building up the guests. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure that you're pulling out of them what the most important things. But you are in many ways, you're the advocate for the audience, as the host, so you're advocating for the audience. You're trying to figure out, what does the audience want to hear, next about the guest, not what does the guest want to talk about, not what the guest is running on about or not saying. Your job as the advocate is to as the audience, you're the representation of that audience, pulling out of them what the audience is going to want to know and cutting them off when you think the audience would be bored. And it's funny, one of the things about hosts is that almost all of them are ADD. It's funny. It is a like, you should I've been at dinners with a bunch of hosts, and it is chaos, because hosts, the ADD, ADD is not, and I've said this before, but I don't believe that ADD is a disability. I think it's a superpower, and it's a superpower that it's like, I always, when I watch X-Men, I always think of, ADD are mutants, and they're mutants that are able to handle enormous, and everyone's trying to put them down, trying to push them back into a little box. And the thing is that what someone with ADD has is this incredible skill to handle multiple threads of thought at the same time. And so that you're able, as if you're ADD, it's because you're managing all these things at the same time, and you're basically jumping tracks. And that in some parts of the world, in some jobs, that's not effective. In old-fashioned school, it's not effective. As a host, it's super effective. Like it's like you letting your inner mutant free. So because you're sitting there and you're managing, stuff coming in from one place, you're managing people talking, you're managing all these other things, and you have to keep on shifting back and forth. So people who end up as hosts, oftentimes it's a place for ADD to succeed, is because it's not quite a job requirement, but it's almost a job requirement to be at the top level of hosting, because you'll also get bored before the audience. That's a really key thing, is that when the host gets bored, you need to get bored before the audience gets bored, or they leave. So your job is to cut people off. You'll notice with me, with the guests, sometimes our panelists will start to go around what I call going around the house twice before they go in the front door. I'll start to see them go around, and sometimes I'll let them go around once, but you'll see me then just cut them off, and I'll usually change direction or whatever. That's because I've decided that we don't need to go around that house. It's my job. Like, that's my job, is to do that. It's not to, have everybody say everything that they want to say. It's my job to cut them off when it's time to move on to the next thing and keep the conversation moving. And I do it of varying degrees of effectiveness. It's not a precise science, but it's something that you kind of, that's something to kind of think about. Go ahead, Chris, and then I think, Daria after Chris.
I think I've talked about this before in the past, but as an editor, Sky knows about tops and tailing. You top and tail a clip. And when I listen to people talk, I'm constantly in my head re-topping the clip. Like, don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Could have come in right here. Right. And it's super frustrating. And it's interesting because there are social cues that we get by being able to talk to people face to face. And I could see in your face, you're just like, oh, he's done with me. He did. Okay, I'm done. And or like Sky always says, stepping away.
And it is
people don't see those cues, and it's weird.
And that's a good being a good, we're not talking about that today, but being a good guest is knowing exactly the people who get called back to So the people who get called back to shows, whether it's a podcast or a broadcast show or any of these other things, are people who typically know how to package their thoughts into one little, like they'll listen to something, they'll package it up and they'll say it in one little bit, and then and they'll listen to the host. If they're not listening to the host, they're talking over everybody, they better be really important, because if they do that more than once or twice and they're not like someone that you have to call for that, you're never going to get called back again. Daria?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think there's also this like new sort of 2.0 hosting that I feel like I've done more, which is I feel like when it's just you in the audience and just
Right.
this interactive show and there aren't any guests, that's still hosting too. And I actually, I wanted to come today because I'm about to start hosting my first show like with regular guests, with other musicians. And so I wanted to learn from you guys, but it's also, I'm interested in that conversation too, of like holding the energy purely for the audience and kind of like the audience are the guests and you're pulling questions from them and keeping it interesting for them. And that's sort of what I've spent a lot of my time doing. And it's interesting, like you do all the same stuff of like feeling when to move on and keep it going. And like, okay, now I need a song and now I need a little conversation and feeling the energy dip a little bit.
Whoop.
Uh-oh,
That was
frozen.
we lost her.
Or dip a lot,
she dipped a little bit and then off she went. All right. Oh, there you go. There you go. You're back. You're back, Daria.
Anyway, yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
Well, yeah, and it is, you're interacting with the audience. And you'll see, a lot of as a host for this show, you'll see me very focused on, working with people to remind them to ask questions, to interact with, there's little things that we do that we make sure of, which is to make sure that when someone asks a question that we have their name, and if they put in their location, we put their location, we mention their location. We don't skip over that, because that's acknowledging them, that they've asked that question. If they didn't want to put their name in, if they didn't want you to say the name, they wouldn't have put it in there. So so it's one of those things that's important. So talking to the audience and having that really casual conversation with the audience to what you're saying is super important, because I really feel like we're on our way to a new kind of broadcast. It was funny, we were talking about Zoom focusing on virtual events, and I've been thinking about virtual events a lot. I got to do a talk next week on it. And I'm starting to wonder whether that should be the goal, virtual events, and whether we should be thinking about virtual events or whether we should be thinking about what I would call scalable conversations. This is what office hours is what I would call a scalable conversation. It's a conversation with, right now about 220 people in the room, at this moment, with all the different platforms that we're doing, that I'm watching. And so that scalable conversation is something that is a different beast. It's not a virtual event. It's not a broadcast. It's something else. And so we are going to keep on having to learn what we, what is required. But I think that some of this stuff is pretty basic, of setting those ground rules, setting that process. And, one of the things that I will say that we see hosts have a lot of trouble with, especially when they're working with high profile, is that kind of assertiveness of, pulling things out of people, cutting them off, and also throwing what we call throwing the ball, whatever kind of ball you want to throw, right? The issue is that one of the things as a host is your job is to, especially when you don't have partners or guests that have done this a lot, what you don't want to do is open-ended questions. And you'll notice, like you watch This Week with George Stephanopoulos or whatever, he's throwing that question to somebody every single time. Like he is throwing down the, to the, he's saying, Chris Christie, this, Paul or Rahm Emanuel, this, like, what's the question here? He's not asking an open-ended question for people to decide to jump in, because that creates uncomfortable pauses. So as a host, our job is to keep it moving down where we want it to go. Now, if you've got guests that know each other really well, like if you look at Mac Break, Leo doesn't have to do that with Andy and Renee and I very often, because we are watching each other the whole time and queuing off of each other and waiting. I know when Andy's going to stop talking, and I know when Renee is going to stop talking, and we kind of have but if you're dealing with guests that haven't been on a couple hundred shows together, you need to, make sure that they're giving straight guidance. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing I wanted to because you talk about being able to have a group of people that will help you with that, but I do a lot of solo stuff myself. So I wanted to inject that just really quick because it's important that yeah, if you have to do more than one thing while you're trying to host, that you want to have a lot of familiarity in your workstation. Like for instance, yesterday we did the Streamdeck stuff. I had my Stream Decks in a very odd place, so it was really tough to try and manage around. But from that, I actually took my 15 button Stream Deck, put it to the right because it was more comfortable for me to actually switch from my right hand rather than my left hand. And I realized that, and I made a change from that. So a little bit of familiarity for where your buttons is if you have to do it solo.
Well, and one of the things about me is that I'm constantly thinking about ease of use because as a host, when I'm thinking about my home setup or my office setup, I'm thinking about how do I remain present? Like that's the whole thing that goes through my head is how do I set up this environment so that I can remain present to my audience, to the conversation. It's all those little commas that you add as you're trying to figure something out that take away from that conversation. And so that comes down to the ergonomics of where everything is. It comes down to, where things are laid out. It also comes down to pre-planning to make sure that you have set everything up on certain pages and you've laid it all out and that you have a sense of a run of show, that you're going to go from this to this to this to this. So the pre-planning, the ergonomics, and then if you can, the help that you can get to kind of produce those shows are the things. But as a host, you're trying to stay present and you're trying to keep that conversation moving down the path, and it should be something that you're interested in, right? And so, and you have to get to a point where you trust yourself enough to just go with your gut. A lot of times, it's going to have to, when it becomes a good show, is when you're just doing what feels natural next. Sky, and then Bill, and then Leland.
I'm identifying with so many of these things, and Vic, you're talking about the jazz in the moment, and you're tossing and that's the other analogy that Alex, you're saying tossing the ball, but maybe you toss it to the piano or you toss it to the drums, or so the other thing about the ADD of you've allowed my inner mutant to come out, Vic, Alex, thank you very much. I identify with that. And the quick anecdote is Graham Kerr tells the story of sitting at the BBC, having a lovely chat with the host, and then all of a sudden the lights come on, and the gloves come out, because again the host wants energy and he wants conflict, and he uses a technique of attack, which again really threw Graham for a loop.
Right.
And how do you? I guess I'd be curious, Alex, how do you get the energy without using that technique of the AM radio?
That's their style. I mean, you have to know as a guest going in that this is another subject, but as a guest, you always watch. If you're going to show up on a show, I've shown up on a couple of broadcast shows, and I watch a whole bunch of their episodes so that what I'm looking for is, as a guest, what I'm looking for is how do they run their show? And then I'm also looking at facial tics. So I'm looking for, when are they upset about the guest? Like, what are they doing on their face? Because everybody has them. Like, all these hosts have facial tics. Chris was talking about mine. I get bored. I get bored with someone talking. I'm like just waiting for them to stop saying whatever they're saying. Chris is cued off on my facial
the one I like that you do, Alex. You'll say, I can't remember the exact words. You go, yeah, exactly. And when you go, yeah, exactly, it means I wasn't listening, but I don't care. Let's move on. I'm a peek behind the curtain. Yeah, exactly. No, he wasn't listening.
No, I am. The funny thing is, I am always listening, but there is a point for some people when they're.
But it's mostly I want to move on.
But there is a point where I get conscious to moving on, and as a guest, what you want to do. I know we're getting into guests, but as a guest, what you want to do is get used to when the host gave you that feedback of you went too far. It's not a problem. I mean, that's part of a show, is saying too much, or too little, or whatever. But you want to, as a guest, like when I'm doing it with Leo, I know I can tell you every single time, and it'll be 4 or 5 times in a show where I either said something wrong or talked too long or whatever, and Leo just kind of went some other direction. And so it's not that you ever figure it out, but I take that as a note. I go, oh, Leo didn't like that. And I try to shave that. As a guest, I try to shave that off, because that's what makes that's what makes me a good guest, is you are like I look at when I'm on Mac break, I look at Leo is the conductor and I'm playing an instrument, which is the instrument of being a guest. And so he's trying to do this thing. And if I start playing some other show, if I start playing another song, or if I don't play in time, or if I don't do all those other things, he's like, oh, okay, that was a hard one because those folks went the wrong way. But if you get really good at playing, and it's like being able to go into a round table on broadcast or someone else's podcast and just play with the band and just mix in with the band and be part of that conversation, you end up getting called back because you're like, oh, that they're a great member of that conversation. Go ahead, Bill, and then Leland.
Bear with this analogy for a minute, but I have a friend who moved to Los Angeles, and he was a good photographer here, and he's a young guy. And when he moved to Los Angeles, he got hooked up in the modeling community, and so he was working with the best-looking young men and the best-looking young women on the planet. And after a while, he said, I'm bored. I'm not getting any farther. And I said, yeah, because you're getting lazy. You get these fabulous people to show up in front of your camera, and you don't have to do a ton of work to make them look good. Stop working with models. Start working with real people, because as an interviewer, for me, guests that are already naturally fabulous interviewers don't stretch you. It's when you get somebody who has great content but a terrible presence, and you have to work hard to extract information from them. You have to use all sorts of tricks to get their energy up. That's when you start getting better at what you do. If you just have people who walk in who are already good, you're going to just spin your wheels.
The one thing that is also just the hard truth is that it will take you a couple hundred shows to get good. And you have to just know that it's going to take you a couple hundred shows. Like I got to do it over radio in the late 80s, early 90s, so that no one got to hear it. No one recorded it. It was horrible. I was horrible. Like, just like I have a couple tapes. I found one a little 10 years ago, and I listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so bad. It is practice, but it's also practice and then listening. One of the hardest things for a host to do is watch themselves. And you should watch yourself do what you're doing. It's painful, but it'll make you much better. Go ahead, Leland.
I do that on the regular. I do go back and watch a lot of my interviews. As one who's done hundreds of interviews worldwide, both one-on-one and in group settings, I find it good to kind of prep the guest before as the host. I want them to feel comfortable when they come to the broadcast. So I usually give them a form, and this is one similar to the one that I used to use back in the Blab days, where I would simply ask who they are, what they're all about, and give a mainstream of what their main biography is, and then give them like 4 questions pointed that I would develop for their particular case and say, these are the questions we're probably going to touch on. And then we're going to have a free form round robin discussion with the audience after the fact. And that gives them an idea of what to expect. Most guests are so nervous about being on camera with a host that's going to be questioning them in the first place that you want to ease them a little bit into that so that they're not wondering what to say, because obviously any of us, when we go first on camera live, we're all nervous. We get the butterflies. So we're not sure what to say. So ease them into it as you.
Enthusiasm is really important. When you're starting it off and people being enthusiastic, you being enthusiastic about the guest in your emails, when they first come on. So the structure that Leland talked about, and then just making sure that they're excited, that you're excited to have them. You can get caught up in all the details and forget that. All right, let's jump into go ahead, Michael, real quick, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Well, I've noted there's a show that's broadcast generally live on YouTube once a week, and it's called the Pete and Sebastian Show. It's 2 comics that are fairly well known, but Sebastian Maniscalco, I've noted that he'll use a handheld mic all the time, and perhaps it's because he's trying to stay fresh for when they're able to go back out and perform their live shows.
It's just probably how he knows how to use a mic.
And secondly, when he's trying to make a point about something, he's sharp enough that he will lean in kind of like that.
Right.
And it has a real effect, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You're being dramatic. Drama. All right, next question.
Ed Willock of Valley Cottage, New York has the first one. For this, as a host, what's your process for pre-show research on your guests and topics?
I have a tool that I use. It's super powerful. It's called Google. So if you're a guest on here, I'll usually Google you. I'll go if some of the guests that we've had have Wikipedia pages, so I'll comb through their Wikipedia page. I'll comb through their LinkedIn. I'll look for anything else that they've written or about. So usually there's kind of that basic background that I'm in a pre-show. If we're having someone specific come in that if I don't know them already, I'm going to try to get to know them. What I'm looking for is obviously the questions that I can ask, but I'm also looking for things that would step on, I don't want to, you can ask a question about something that now hits up. If you ask them about their mother and their mother had passed away 10 years before and it was really hard, then that's the rest of the interview, and so you just have to you just need to think about things that are, the more you know about them, the more you can stay away from issues. Go ahead, Chris, and then Guy. Between your breakfast and our show, Chris,
waffles. I can't tell you how delicious it is.
Yeah,
Alex
not
Lindsay
good,
and waffles every morning. It makes my night.
As a guest,
anyway,
not good for him.
I know, whatever.
Okay.
When I was doing my Final Cut podcast, I used to like to go. I preferred going into them cold, and it's a style. It's not necessarily the best. And what I would always do is I'd ask about people's history, how they get into the business, etc. Because my philosophy was, if I told you a story about, I started working with this and this, and you're just a listener and you go, oh, I used to use that tape deck. Yeah, I use that camera too. All of a sudden, I bond with you at a certain level because you and I both know the same piece of equipment. And as a listener, now I've given that speaker a certain amount of credibility because I was always interviewing people that had never been had a public face at all because I was digging to find Final Cut 10 users, and a lot of them are very, very quiet in the industry.
Right. A Guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're doing that Google research, if they do have a Wikipedia, it's nice to look at the footnotes and sometimes go and read deeper into other things that were published and then bring some of those up, and you find this common ground really quick. Or they'll say, man, you really done your homework, because you find some little tidbit that was written 10 years ago, and then it makes them happy, and they light up to tell that story again, and it just puts you on common ground. So that's another little tip.
Absolutely. Finding something that they obviously enjoy that no one asks them about is something that really will pick them up a little bit. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing I like to do is, and it depends on if it's live or if it's recorded. I do a lot of recorded and live as well. But if the person's there a few minutes early on a live or in the recorded, I try to do the first 5 minutes to ask, to kind of get in the direction of the questions that I'm going to be asking anyway. That way, if they don't have experience on a live stream, they kind of have already reviewed things, so they don't stumble on their words. They don't forget certain key points like price points or anything like that, and they have that fresh in their head.
Yep, absolutely. And next question.
Moving on to one from Ed Willick of Valley College, New York. How much prep with your guests do you do before going live? Do you feed guests all the questions in advance? That's the part we haven't touched.
I give people a direction that I'm going to go. I'm going to ask you about this and this and this and this. I'm going to get you set. I'm going to set you up with a couple questions, and then we'll have a conversation. So I definitely tell them the direction that I'm looking for. I also ask if there's things they don't want to talk about. I'm not a gotcha journalist. I find that type of journalism to be repugnant. So as a result, I tend to ask people, are there things you don't want to talk about? And if they tell me, I won't talk about them. I'm not this is not the type of, it's not my style. I don't really care about that kind of content. And so I definitely, what I'm really worried about is them being technically ready so that they sound and look good, and that they're part, especially with our group. There's a lot of conversations that you get from me, as people here who've been guests know about, hey, the people here are pretty well set up. You just need to know that, if you come in with just your basic webcam and opened built-in microphone, you may not stand up very well with the group that's here. So I kind of warn people that that people here are pretty well, set up technically, because it will affect how they view what they're doing. But as far as sending them all the stuff, now when we did This Week in Media, which I'm hoping to turn back on relatively soon, in that case, all of the guests got a dossier, And that dossier is, here are the 5 or 6 things that we're going to talk about. Here is all the links to all the research that you could do on it. We would actually break it into text only so that they could one of our panelists would listen to it while he was driving. So we'd have somebody strip out all the ads and everything else, and it was just pure text. We didn't do it, but he would pump it into something that would push out, using Siri or whatever, push out a bunch of audio, and he'd listen to all the articles all the way up to where we're recording. And so giving them all that information. And then I would say, for you, I'm going to ask you this question. For you, I'm going to ask you this question based on this one. So they knew, they had a pretty good idea. And it would break up. But the first question that was going to go to each panelist from me, they'd all know what that is. And you'll always, and that's not, I didn't make that up. That's what they do at like this week. It's like the first question coming to them, they've already got, and that's why it's so tight. It's a tight, they've thought about it, they've worked on it, and a lot of time, for each subject. So, and then you keep on talking after that, and then it gets a little rougher, but you let them know, what you're going to ask them so that they're ready for it when you throw the ball. Jeffrey?
One thing that I do, and I've been doing it with my CES and NAM interviews, because they're burn-in interviews, I didn't record ISOs for them, is I actually feedback the screens to the people. Of course, you can't do that with audio, you can only do it with video. But then I explain to them, I'm going to be switching scenes. So you're going to see my face in one, you're going to see the screen in one, you're going to see a split in one, and that's when I ask you a question. And then, of course, yourself, and I explain the reason why I show it to you is so you see that lip sync difference and don't get flustered because of it. That way they know the storyline, the flow of where the show is going.
Yep. Next question.
Michael Fisk of Spokane Valley says, I'm trying to eliminate monitor glare on my glasses. Is anyone using AR coating lenses? And what other options will let my baby blues sparkle?
Number one thing is angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. So I have 2 big lights right here, right there, but they're just high enough based on where my monitors. If I turn up like this, there they are. When I turn back down, there they're gone. And so you can get a lot of coatings, you can do a lot of things, but the best thing to do, it turns out when you get that angle, you also get a nice, a bit more of a cut around the jaw. It kind of separates your face out, especially for me, it separates my face from my double chin. Go ahead, Roscoe.
His monitor glare specifically use dark mode, because if I right now go to my white page, it definitely shows up, and so I go back. Yep. So it's usually use dark mode and dim it down.
Yeah, dark mode is key to the operation. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just turn around. Wherever you're going to be looking at the camera, go behind the camera and look around and see what things are behind you, because people don't realize they have a huge light over here that's going to cause glares and things like that. So be the camera before you go live and look at what it's going to see. And if there are a lot of light sources, mask them or get them out if they're not practical.
Yep. Next question.
Ed Willick of Valley Cottage, New York. In a live stream where we're taking audience Q&A outside of a space like office hours where we're pretty well behaved, are you screening questions? And if so, what's the process to screen questions, assuming using video participants, not just text comments?
Outside of office hours, I almost never do video questions, with people that aren't prepped. That's why Makana was built. It was the earlier version of Makana. We literally used it in the room where they could walk into a mic, but we took their mics away and we had them just ask the questions over text. And the reason that we do that very specifically is people don't pontificate. And that's the biggest thing that we really worry about, is that people get up and they say something for 5 minutes to ask a question that isn't even very good, and so by pushing it into text, it allows us to shorten their question. It allows us to see the question and manage that question. It allows us to, read it better than they can usually say it. So if you know the people, maybe, and in very safe environments, possibly. But I found that, like, when we did it for a World Bank event in 2009. And I think that the World Bank within a year stopped using mics in the room, because it was so much faster. The velocity of the conversation is so much faster with text-based questions than it is with live questions. Live questions are just they're just a sinkhole, of time, and I know that's people like it because it's very authentic and, all that other stuff, but it's really painful. to do that. Now, again, if you need some back and forth, if you want to have a conversation, there are reasons to do it. But if you're lining people up for questions, I would do it with text. If you want people to actually have an interaction with the host or whatever, then there is a reason to bring them on. And again, I do it in very small amounts because it's so painful. Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, part of it is that most people are trained from being a kid to write for the eye, to write for something that's going to be read off a page. We're really in a world where we're writing for the ear. We're trying to get conversational. And if you watch the questions come by, you'll notice I make a lot of subtle adjustments, and I do not change meaning or get the question different, but all I'm trying to do is make it more conversational, use more contractions, and figure out if there's something that I'm reading here that is not making sense to my brain as a spoken thing. I'm trying to translate into something that'll make the meaning clearer for people who are now listening, not reading.
And again, to go back to the text thing, what I will say is that if you look at the number of questions we go through in office hours, you could never do that. If we did it in an auditorium with a bunch of people sitting around, it would be a third of the number of data, to do it if we did it that way. Next question.
Yeah. Ed Willock is back again with how do you decide what guests and topics to bring to air?
I usually decide sometimes if the guest is really interesting or really important, then it's the guest and it's whatever topic they want to talk about. Bringing, if it's a topic, then I'm looking for people that I think would be great in that topic. And I'm the advocate. You're the advocate for your audience. So you're trying to think about what your audience wants, what they ask questions about, what they are interested in, or you think that they should be interested in. And then you start wrapping it around. Go ahead, Ed, and then Leland.
Yeah, I guess I was more asking like how do you curate? Like how do you figure out what your audience is going to want to see and who they're going to want to hear it from?
So I will say that I'm not a very good. All of my shows have been, I'm interested in this, and let's see if other people are willing to show up. It's not. I'd love to say that I try to look at a thing, but this week in media Mac Break, when I created Mac Break and then handed it off to Leo, it was like, I love Macs. I'm going to make a show about it. And the same thing with This Week in Media. I was like, I think it's really we're going to be in interesting times. I was a little early with it, but all of my shows have been, I'm passionate about this subject, and I'm gonna try to collect people in my tribe. I'm not by putting it out there. It is, I think that Daria is a good example of that. She's doing her thing. She's playing her music, and but she's not trying to figure out what does the audience want from her as much as she just figures out this is what I love to do, and I'll be enthusiastic about it, and then people will show up or they won't. And so for me, I'm trying to constantly figure out how do I get the message out about what I'm doing to more people, knowing that 1 or 2% will stick. And the rest of them will go find something else that they're interested in. That's great. I'm not trying to figure out how I get 4 or 5 to stick rather than 1 or 2. I'm just trying to figure out how do I move 100 through faster, to keep on aggregating that audience. But that's been my approach. Again, people have to think about how they do that. I think about it as just what am I interested in? And then can I make it compelling? My job is to make what we do here compelling so that people want to come back. Leland and then Mickey. Real quick.
Yeah, I think Alex hit it on the head when he talks community and audience. Obviously, it's about who you're presenting to. The other is to take a few polls now and then with your audience and see, was this content something you guys really resonated with you? Was it worth bringing it back again later? Or is this something you'd rather not see, or what can we stem off from that? And that kind of input really helps you.
And Discord is invaluable. Like I read Discord I don't interact all the time, but I read almost every post on Discord. Every day, I'm just kind of and sometimes I'm scanning it or whatever, but I'm going through it. And what that does, it's not that I'm making decisions. No, I definitely make decisions on second hour suggestions. So second hour for us is super important. Like if you put stuff in there, I'm scanning that stuff and making lists and trying to figure out how I incorporate that in, especially for me, to get back to your question, is people who put second hour in and then I see 7 to 10 votes on it. That's kind of my I got to figure this out. Mode of there's enough people that represents enough people that I'm interested in putting it in. So I'm definitely, but by reading it all and just kind of scanning through it, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of absorbing the flow of the audience, of our group, of the people that are in Discord. I'm just kind of feeling it, oh, they're interested in this and this is an interesting conversation and everything else. I don't think about it specifically, and there's no research data, but as their advocate, it's in the back of my head. So as I'm thinking about stuff, it starts to express itself by me finding what I think they're going to be interested in. Sometimes even before they're interested in it, hopefully. Mickey?
Alex, can you talk about your approach, say for more on the corporate side of things, like shows for clients? Like, I know it's mostly curated by the marketing department or whatever, but for you, like what's your method of thinking about this? If you were asked to decide on it or suggest things.
How do you serve your audience? Not how you'll sell your, do not think about how to sell your product. Like that comes naturally with service. So when you look at your audience, what do they need? What information do they need? Now that might be how to use your product better, but it also might be more about the industry that you're in, and so how do you give them that information? And that's what I always focus on. When someone asks me, I'm always like, well, what would their audience, people who use that product or people who could potentially buy that product, what are they trying to solve? And it might not be even your product. It's the idea is that you're building something that group might be interested in. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, just speaking to what you were just saying, Alex, I've had a couple of developers of products on the show that I host, and the thing I was very resistant to do it. And when I first did it, I said, hey, this can't be a sales pitch for what you're doing. Right. Like, cause our show is kind of a show and tell kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And, we even had Andy from Zoom OSC. And when he came on, I said, you know what? I'm going to give you an opportunity to mention your other product, Streamweaver, but I don't want it to be a pitchy thing. And as soon as we mention it, there's going to be 10 questions that come in about it, and it'll naturally, organically give us the opportunity to talk about it. And he took that note, great, and it actually folded out exactly the way I thought it would. So just to what you're saying, it'll kind of sell itself if you make the content good.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Daria.
Yeah, and I don't know if Mickey was also asking about like designing a show or hosting a show for a client. But yeah, like that's something I'm actually getting ready to do myself. The interview show I'm going to start doing is going to be for Taylor Guitars, and I'm going to be like hosting other songwriters and other musicians. And so it's easy if I think the way I'm approaching is like, if you're already a fan of the product and you already know, like you're a part of that community, like we're all sort of a part of this community. I'm not going to talk to people about like, which, setting do you like on the guitar the best, but I'm going to maybe ask them questions about like their technique and the way they approach. And if you were a chord, like which chord would you be? Or if there was a song you wish you wrote and like, what was the first song you ever learned and stuff like that. I think we'll hopefully, we haven't launched yet. I think we're launching in a few weeks, but hopefully that will pull out some like emotional and visceral kind of interesting questions. That was another thing I was going to say earlier was one of my favorite things to do, just talking to people anyway, is to ask about like a moment of spark, like a moment of inspiration, like when you got into the thing that you do now, like what was the moment you realized this is something that you loved? Because you usually see people's eyes light up and you get like an emotional story that can be fun to play off of. Yeah, and about bringing people in on video. I was just sitting here laughing because I was like, I'm probably the only person that made Alex do that in a really crazy Wild West way, because I used to just let people come in like willy-nilly.
Well, we do it here. We do it here.
No, I know that's true, but like, it was a little crazier, and I was lucky. I never had anything like too crazy happen. But when you started working with me for bigger events, I was like, oh, thank God, Alex is going to make sure they're like wearing clothes and it's okay. But yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to your point, a lot of like we did a stream with Thomas Keller and All Clad and Williams Sonoma. There was no real conversation about it other than, hey, we're here at the Williams Sonoma kitchen, and he happens to be using All Clad, and then he's showing us how to make an amazing dish, pot roast that was just amazing. But the thing is, he didn't need to talk. He didn't need to say, and now I'm going to show you All Clad. Let's have an interruption of our show being from All Clad. You can see it in the show. Like you can see you can see the logo when we of course we pay attention to that. But the point is that when you're building it for the show, if service to the community that you're serving, if service is the highest thing, and the fact that they find out about the product is the second thing, or third thing, or even fourth thing, the lower you can move that branding down from service, to where it's at. And I think that, going to call him out and embarrass him. But Guy is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Is someone who, serves his community, shows up here. I didn't know Guy was part of DVE Store for like the first month. Like, so I just knew DVE Store, and but I didn't know who Guy was. But that's what I would call that slow sell of being part of a community. The guys, I don't even know if guys are trying to sell us anything. Like, it's like he's showing other sites, other things. He's just part of the community. Serving that community is part of it. And oh, by the way, if you need to buy stuff, and it's why a lot of us buy stuff from Guy, and why we talk about it is because it's clear that he's here to serve and be part of the community, not to sit here and try to, sell us on something. So and that clarity makes it easy to interact with. Let's go to the next question. We're running out of time. Next question.
Okay. Nate Hill of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Nate.
As a producer that talks to talent while on air, I'm interested in the host perspective on IFBs. What works and what doesn't?
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, a couple of things. There's two different kinds of things, so if a teleprompter, in my estimation, is about a 6 on the scale of easy to use, you must learn it to be good at it, an IFB is an 11. It is one of the things that if somebody does not know how to use that and has not been trained in it, it will throw them, particularly if they're actually live, faster than anything else. Listening and continuing now, if you're on a panel and a producer is talking to you inside of when others are not talking, that's a much easier use case. But the real IFB live on the air to somebody who's expounding on a topic and getting instructions at the same time is an incredibly difficult learned skill. And you have to practice before you should be allowed to use one of those, my opinion.
So the main thing for IFBs, we would put IFBs into everyone. And thanks, Nate, for asking the question. For me, the number one thing is that, just to what Bill was talking about, don't talk while I'm talking. I mean, that's like the thing that drives me absolutely crazy, even now, is anybody talking into my ear while I'm trying to talk. The second thing is for me anyway, is that you need to be concise. So there, and I don't have that problem very often, but a lot of times when someone's talking into my ear, I need them to say what they need to say in the fewest number of words. Please think about it before you say it, and then say it exactly and be clear. I can't figure it out. I'm in a show. So nouns and verbs, super simple, super short. What do I have to do? And that's the big thing that that I need to know as a guest. And usually it's notes like, this person's 5 minutes late, or, hey, we're going to move this. But as a host, when I'm talking to people in the ear, I'm super sensitive to it. I think about how I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it really clearly. A really good mic with good noise cancellation is really valuable. We use SM58s for most of them, and we turn them down, and we have them right up here, and we have we have a little switch, and it's all off. And so it's super clear. It's, we think about it a lot of how we're going to say it, so that, and we test it and make sure that it is just the right volume. And we ask you, I'm going to speak to you here like this. Is this going to work before the show? And make sure that is super clear. And it's not some weird headset mic that isn't really working. And it isn't, it is, I mean, some headset mics work. Nate's is actually really good. I've worked with Nate. Nate's got a good mic. Anyway, so, but there's a lot of mics that aren't, and you turn on your IFB and suddenly you hear the whole truck, or you hear all the other stuff and everything else. And that is not a good move, because I need to hear it really clearly and short and quickly about what needs to happen, is usually that. And then just keeping the talk to the minimum. The more, you always want to think about what you're exposing to the host and whether the host really needs to know. But what they need to know, they just need to know it, and they need to know it fast. It's invaluable, because we have it all the time. We have talk back to everyone, but we're very careful of who, even if we give the client talk back over, like, let's say Agent IC or Unity or whatever, even if we give them talk back, they're not up all the time. They have to talk to us about it and say, hey, I need to say something. And then you'll get back from us like, what do you need to say? And it's like, okay, we'll do it. But, let's wait. And we prep someone who's coming in, because we'll have a producer in New York talking into someone here in LA while we're running it from San Francisco. So they need to be able to talk to them, but until we know them, we just want to make sure that they're not doing run-on sentences while the person's trying to prep. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it happened to me yesterday. I was on live and they opened up the mic and I could hear myself, and man, I was just kind of subtly taking it out because I'm just like, I can't hear myself back. Otherwise, I'm going to sound drunk. It's just like it comes out
This
like
this
just
is
warbled.
I feel like this is the international that is the international sign of you're doing something wrong with my anytime I see an artist that's up on stage go like this, and they do it especially when they go like this, they go like that. That's like looking up, if they're subtle, it just means it's bothering them or whatever. But them taking it out, that is a kick in the teeth to whoever is putting it in, that they've either screwed up the music, they've screwed up the click track, they've screwed up the talkback. But them taking it out is like, you're screwing up. And I'm going to do that on air. Anyway, next question.
Moving on, Michael Fisk is next with when Office Hours goes live on YouTube. If a panelist steps away for a moment when the screen is on a single individual, does that impact or have a negative effect on the broadcast?
If it's on a single, it doesn't matter. You won't see it. You'll see it if it's in the gallery view. But if it's singled on that person, and we use that a lot. We use that a lot in shows where we'll cut to someone handle something and a cut back. In fact, a lot of times when you feel like a camera is hanging when you're watching a show, is hanging on another camera for a little while, you're like, why did they hang on that camera for so long? It's not because they forgot. It's because they're doing something over here and they're covering it. They're papering it over with this camera shot. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, specifically for office hours, at least. I prefer that you turn off your camera, because when we cut to the gallery view, the people who have their cameras off will be hidden in the gallery view. People won't see an empty chair. So that's what I would prefer for office hours, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. We keep moving.
Yeah. Tony Mobley, friend from Newman, Georgia, says, besides the Streamdeck, what are the best tools for use for hosting?
IFB and teleprompter. Those are the two things that I would say as a host. Those are the two things that I want the most is an IFB and a teleprompter to be able to manage that stuff. Go ahead, Roscoe.
And good people throwing you the questions.
Yeah. Someone managing. I was thinking tools, but other things that you want is absolutely an infrastructure that is working, a quiet infrastructure. Other things are like a place in wherever you're going to do your show that doesn't have a lot of eye lines, doesn't have a lot of exterior sounds, doesn't have a lot of, that you're trying to find things that are going to leave it to be quiet. Sorry, I'm going to keep moving. Next question. We're running out of time and I have a heart out.
No problem. Sky Gleason's in next from Seattle. Jeffrey Powers, you're reviewing new products and get a lot of marketing promotions speak. How do you ask questions if the overpromise of the marketing language is a challenge to you and may sound too good to be true?
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Two quick things. First of all, you try and get them off their scripts so you can actually start asking deep-ended questions to get them going. And then, of course, try and move the story. Sometimes you have to do that Jimmy Fallon effect, and that is be the fanboy and let them speak for a couple minutes. But then, yeah, you got to cut them hard if you need to.
Yep. Next question.
Stuart Fairweather, panel. Daria, plug the new show link.
Is it a new show? Do we know what it is?
Yeah. Just go to Instagram right now. I know it's not the best place for video, but that's probably where the new Taylor show is going to be. And it's also where I've been going live every single day. I'm going to go live after I get off here.
Are you going Daria, are you going Instagram through the phone?
I am right now, and it looks stupid, but it sounds great. But
I'll show you a fix.
Save me. Okay, thank you. Save me.
Next question.
Sam Downey, Bristol, England. Can I be a guest? Talk about being a disabled tech geek and host who has worked in radio, podcast, live webcasts, and being a beta tester for the platform's TV and short films. He's supported by BAFTA as a neurodivergent creator. And book me on. I'll be glad to share tips and tidbits.
Okay, Sam. Yeah, Sam, send me a ping in Discord. Absolutely. Next question.
Michael Fisk of Spokane Valley for Daria or panelists. Have you used the new AirPods Pro? And if so, what's your opinion?
I haven't used them. I stick with these guys for all my studio stuff. I know they're big and honky, but sort of become my look. But I like an over ear for studio stuff and for music.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
I've used the AirPod Pro, the in-ear stuff, and I've thought that the sound quality was not as good. I've got actually the FIIL T1XS headset, and that works really well for shows, things like this.
Next question.
Okay, I just have to say Daria's name right after I missed it. So anyway, Stuart Fairweather, Melbourne, I know. Blackmagic design job opportunity may be interesting to someone watching, and there's a couple of links in there. So some Blackmagic must be hiring.
What's Stuart? What's the?
They've actually got a few jobs going at the moment. The one that I noticed, because I got sent an alert while I was looking for next week's schedule for office hours, FPGA hardware engineer, so that's the people doing all the firmware and what have you. They're also looking for software engineers with C++ experience and a senior 3D visual artist. But the software engineers seem to be everywhere and can probably be done virtually.
Yep. Yeah, I have a feeling they're growing. Anyway, thank you everyone. That was a great. Thanks Daria for jumping in. Thank you everyone at the panel for a great show once again. Thanks to everyone who is in the audience, the attendees. Great questions today. We had a good show, and the quality of the show. We do the best we can as the panelists. I mean, we're just kind of meandering around, but really the show is driven and created by the attendees, and it's just really the quality of the questions keeps on getting better and better. So great work by the attendees. Thank you for your contribution, and thanks to all the panelists who are part of this conversation every day. It's kind of amazing that we do this every day. It's just cool. Anyway, and it gets better. I feel like we're getting into a rhythm that we're just really cruising with. So I just really appreciate everybody who shows up and is part of this, my favorite part of the day. So anyway, I'm going to jump into the post show and hand it off, and then I'm going to go to work. So we'll see many of you tomorrow, hopefully early. All right. See you guys.